All right, today we're going to start plant classification part 2. I told you yesterday that this was going to be done in 2 parts. So today we're going to move on into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of where plants are classified and why they're put in those particular groups. So before you start the rest of the video, make sure you have your notes ready to go and something to write with. There is the handwritten option. If you're able to print the notes, that's also fine. Just make sure you have one of those too. Okay, for the handwritten notes, you're going to want to make sure you have your name at the top here. This is notes number 6 in the top right corner. The title is Plant Classification Part 2, and then make sure you have your divider line here with subjects or main topics on the left and details on the right. Okay, so yesterday we briefly mentioned that the two types of plants, or two groups of plants, are vascular and non-vascular. Okay, I told you to think of that word veins whenever you see the word vascular, because what it's talking about is whether or not the plant has tubes or veins to transport water, or if it does not, then it would be the non-vascular group. So, but both these plants are classified according to how they transport water and how they reproduce. In vascular plants, and again, that V standing for veins there are tube-like structures that carry water and minerals throughout the plant, allowing these plants to grow larger. So you have to imagine, obviously, that this plant is attached to the ground at some point, okay? The water is down here below in the ground. Yes? Yes. Okay. The rain may fall onto the leaves, may fall onto the stems every once in a while, but the majority of the water we get gotten from underground. Now, the question is, if this part of the plant, the leaf, or even the stem, okay, right here, is not directly touching the water source down here, how is it going to get water? Okay, and the answer is with the vascular system. So because this plant is a vascular plant, it has the tubes that go from the ground and they work like straws basically, and then transport the water from the ground up to the rest of the plant wherever necessary. Now, if this plant did not have veins or tubes, okay, then the top part of the plant would die off because it wouldn't be able to get to the water, while the bottom part would be able to continue living. So that's just one of the differences there. So for vascular plants in particular, they do have these tube-like structures. If you're doing the handwritten notes, our first general topic is how are they classified. Vascular and non-vascular plants are classified by number 1, how they reproduce, and then number 2, how they transport water. That meaning that vascular has tubes or veins, while non-vascular plants do not have tubes or veins. Okay, so we have the plant kingdom. Okay, that's what my P stands for here. Then we go to non-vascular plants and vascular plants. Those are the two groups. Okay. Now, if we focus just on vascular plants, okay, I'm going to circle the vascular side. These can be further classified into two main groups. Number 1, plants that do produce seeds. And then number 2, plants that do not produce seeds, okay? So both types of those plants will have veins, they will have tubes to transport tissue, but vascular plants either do produce seeds or no seeds, okay? That's our next grouping here. So here's another way to look at it. We know that the plant kingdom is divided into two groups, vascular, and then over here would be non-vascular. Okay, we're focusing specifically on the vascular side. So the next two groupings of plants would be seeds, those plants that do produce seeds, and seedless. Again, both of these are going to have the tubes and vein-like structures to transport water from the ground up, and then food from the top down, but both are types of vascular plants, but the difference is one will reproduce using seeds while the other is seedless. They will reproduce in a different way. Okay, so again, the handwritten notes, all I've done is added kind of a divider line here because I'm getting into my next topic. It just helps me visually kind of see what I'm doing. From here on out, until we get to non-vascular plants, we're going to spend some time talking about the details of vascular plants and why they're classified in that particular way. So, vascular plants are classified into two main groups. one that produces seeds and one that is seedless. All right, so now specifically talking about the seed-bearing plants, okay? So again, we have the plant kingdom. Whoa, hold on, let's try that again. The plant kingdom divides into non-vascular and vascular. Vascular plants, so those that do have veins, are divided into seeds and seedless or no seeds. Now, we're going to talk about how we can further divide the seed-bearing plants, okay? Seed-bearing plants can be further classified into two main groups. The first group is angiosperms. So I'm going to put an A right here for that group, okay? Angiosperms are plants that produce flowers. Okay, that's kind of the big deal with angiosperms. Any kind of plant that will produce a flower or a fruit, and that flower or fruit is used to make the seeds. Okay, examples are any kind of flower, roses, sunflower, dandelion, orchid, orchid, etc. Okay, trees and ferns could also be considered angiosperms. They may not have flowers like what you are thinking of as flowers, but they do have some kind of flower that produces a covered seed, meaning the seed is not just exposed, it's actually inside something else. Okay, the other grouping of seed-bearing plants is called gymnosperms. Okay, pronounced just like the gym that you would go to work out or play sports. Okay. So again, I'm going to draw out my classification system here. I think it's just easiest if you see what I'm doing. So plant kingdom, we have non-vascular and vascular. Vascular is divided into seed-bearing plants and non-seed-bearing plants. Now we're talking about those that have seeds. They'll either produce the seeds inside of a flower, which is called an angiosperm. Okay. And then the next grouping is the gymnosperm. That's what we're talking about now. So these plants do produce seeds, right? They are part of this seed producing group up here, but their seeds are not produced inside of a fruit or a flower, but instead are produced in either hard berries or cones. Okay, pine trees, conifers, cycads, ginkgo, netophytes, those kinds of plants could be considered gymnosperms. The most common one that we think of with gymnosperms is the pine cone, or the pine tree, because the pine cone is used to produce the seeds as opposed to a flower. Okay? So those two groupings of seed plants, angiosperms and gymnosperms. So to figure out whether or not the plant is an angiosperm or a gymnosperm, you have to look at what is produced. So in this case, is this an angiosperm or a gymnosperm? Well, there are a couple clues. First of all, we see in the middle here, let me get a different color. You can see in the middle here, these are actually baby pine cones, okay, which will eventually grow into a mature adult pine cone. The other way you can tell is these spiky leaves right here, okay? It's not always 100% foolproof, but most of the time when the leaves look spiky like this, as opposed to, the kind of broad, flatter, almost like a diamond-shaped leaf of like normal plants, like what you have up here, and that I drew up here for you. The spiky ones, those generally means going to be a gymnosperm. So in this example, this one is a gymnosperm. This one, okay, well, if you're thinking, wait a second, this one has a flower, you're right. This would be an angiosperm. Okay, an angiosperm is any kind of plant that produces a flower, which inside of that would be the seeds. In this case, it would be somewhere in this middle part here. Okay, this one, again, we're seeing the spiky leaves instead of the broad leaves, so this is also going to be a gymnosperm. Also, if you're familiar with pine trees at all, this looks pretty similar to how they look. And what about this one? Well, obviously we don't see a flower, don't see spiky leaves, but I do see a fruit, which means it's going to be an angiosperm. Okay? Again, the angiosperm is the plant that produces a flower or a fruit. Basically, it's anything that is covering the seed. Angiosperm literally means covered seed, which I think we may get to later on in the notes. But if you think about it, obviously the seeds for the orange are inside of the fruit. Therefore, it's covered. Therefore, it would be an angiosperm. So again, kind of continuing on with the graphic I had before, the plant kingdom divides into vascular, and then over here would be non-vascular. Okay, focusing on just the vascular for now. The seed-bearing plants and the seedless plants. Of all the plants that produce seeds, there's two types, angiosperms and gymnosperms. Again, gymnosperms have the pine cone and spiky leaves. Angiosperms has the flower, yikes, or even just the broad flat leaf. Okay. If you're doing the handwritten notes, here's where we are now. We added the bottom part here. Seed-bearing plants are further classified into two groups. Angiosperms, which if you want to, you can draw a little flower out here to the side. I usually do, just to help you remember. These plants produce flowers to make seeds, and then the gymnosperms, I usually draw some sort of a spiky pine cone off to the side. These produce seeds in hard berries or cones, and then I have examples are conifers, cycads, etc. All right. No, it seems kind of hard to believe, but it actually does go a little deeper than this. So let's start over again. Plant kingdom. Hopefully you can do this by now. Vascular and non-vascular. Vascular divides into seeds and no seeds, or seedless. Seed plants divide into angiosperms and gymnosperms. And then the last thing we're going to talk about, I'm going to do it in red so it looks different, is this group right here. Of all the plants that produce flowers, those are further grouped into two separate groups. We call them the monocots and the dicots. Okay, I'm going to erase this now so I can kind of teach you what the cotyledons and things are. Okay, so what are monocots and dicots? Well, both of these, both monocots and dicots, are short for this word that you see over here, cotyledon. Now, a cotyledon is basically what I call a baby seed leaf, okay, which you'll see me write in notes in just a little bit. But the baby seed leaf, basically cotyledon is the very first leaf that forms from a sprouting seed. So if you look in this picture right here, okay, you see the bean gets a little bit bigger, the root begins to sprout out, now it's coming a little even deeper, now it's getting even deeper, and right up top, when the seed capsule begins to break, these leaves, let me circle in a different color, these leaves right here begin to pop out. Those are cotyledons, okay? It's a baby seed leaf, basically the first leaf that will shoot up when the seed germinates and matures into a bigger growing plant. Now, a monocot, if you remember from prior lessons and units in science, this prefix mono means one. This prefix di means two. So, what do you think the type of plant that has two cotyledons would be called? If you said dicots, you are correct. Okay? And then types of plants that have only one cotyledon or one little baby seed leaf, like what you see over here, those are the monocots. There are other differences that you can see, such as how many petals are in the flower, etc. But on the basic level, this is what the monocots and dicots mean. So again, you can see a picture here. This on the left is the monocot. You can see that when the seed begins to germinate, only one cotyledon is present, so it's a monocot. This one right here is the dicot. As the seed begins to germinate, there are two baby seed leaves that sprout at the same time, therefore it would be a dicot. Monocots are angiosperms in which the seed has one cotyledon or baby seed leaf. A cotyledon is the first leaf that appears when the seed starts to grow. Mono, like I said, is a Greek root word that means one or alone. Examples of monocots are palms, grasses, orchids, and lilies. Okay, so each of those types of plants, when they first germinate and sprout out of the ground, they will only have one baby seed leaf showing at the time. As it grows, obviously, like you can see in this last stage of the picture here, it will get more at a time. But the cotyledon is just when the first leaf sprouts, will it have one or will it be a twin and have two? Dicots, however, are angiosperms in which the seed has two cotyledons. Di is a Greek root word that means two or double. Examples of dicots are oak, roses, cacti, and sunflowers. Okay, so again, once the seed sprouts from the ground, obviously over here you can see that those two cotyledons sprout at the same time. So now you choose, is this a monocot or a dicot? Well, since there are two baby seed leaves, 1 and 2, this would be a dicot. This one, however, because you're only seeing one, okay? Now you say, Miss Russell, there's a little one over here on the left. Yes, but you can imagine that a day or two prior to this, when this leaf was not present, this one still would have been. You can tell that because this one's way bigger than the other. So this one would be a monocot. This one would also be a monocot, only one seed leaf. And this one would be a dicot, 2 seed leaves. These videos, I'm not exactly sure what they are at the moment, but I'll look at them, and if necessary, I'll have you watch from the pod. So, plant kingdom, we said that there's vascular over here, and non-vascular is the other group. Within just the vascular side, all the plants that have tubes or veins to transport water and can grow tall from the ground, there's 2 groups, the seeds and the seedless. The seed-bearing groups can divide into angiosperms, those that produce seeds inside of the flower. Wow, my flowers are getting worse and worse. Or gymnosperms, those that produce their seeds inside of a hard berry or a cone. There's my attempt at a pine cone. This is a little tough. Okay. Then of those that, let's see, are in the plant kingdom, have veins, bear seeds inside of a flower. There are fruit. There are 2 different kinds, the monocot and the dicot. The monocot would have 1 baby seed leaf, and the dicot would have 2. Now, the seedless plants, okay, are the ferns, whisk ferns, horsetails, and club mosses. So these do not fall into angiosperms or gymnosperms. So technically the title of this slide is wrong. I should not say that. But because they do not produce seeds, okay, they actually have their own separate category. They're in the seedless group. There's not nearly as many of them, but those would include things like the ferns, which I believe is this one. This is the whisk fern. And then I believe that's the horsetails and club mosses. Now, you need to be very careful with club mosses because just regular mosses would not be vascular plants at all. Club mosses is a specific type of moss that does fall into that category. But in general, mosses actually belong in the non-vascular plants. So they would be in a different group, way, way back towards the beginning. So, like I said, here's our seeds and seedless. We just finished talking about the seed groupings over here. Now we're looking into the seedless plants, okay? And then there's really not a whole lot of further subdivisions from there, just the different types, which we said were ferns, whisk ferns, horsetails, and club mosses. Okay, so for the handwritten notes, here's where I included the part about monocots and dicots. I do want to note that over here I put a little bit further explanation of what a cotyledon is, just because I know it's kind of a new word that we haven't really looked at before. And then these pictures over here also really help just to kind of keep in mind the differences between what monocot means and then dicot as well. And then at the bottom, obviously, I put the information about the seedless vascular plants are the ferns, the whisk ferns, horsetails, and club mosses. Now, that's all of the vascular side. We've not forgotten about the non-vascular side. It's just a much, much, much smaller grouping of plants. Okay, over 94% are in the vascular groups. Only a very small amount are in the non-vascular. So, non-vascular plants, what are they and how are they classified? Well, just like vascular plants, non-vascular plants are also classified or grouped by how they transport water and how they reproduce. Non-vascular plants, they do not have that specialized tissue or tubes or veins, right? It's like saying non-veins, non-vascular, to transport water. So because they don't have the roots to transport that water all the way up to the top of the tree like we saw in the slides before, these particular types of plants they need to actually touch the water source in order to absorb it. Kind of like a paper towel, okay? If a paper towel is going to absorb water, it has to actually touch the water and then it spreads throughout the paper towel. Same thing with the non-vascular plants. these little tiny little shrub looking things here, okay, in order for them to grow and actually get water, they have to directly touch the water source. So generally you'll only find non-vascular plants in swampy, more wet areas. That also means the non-vascular plants are pretty small in size because they can't grow very tall at all. There's only one main group of non-vascular plants. This is the much easier one to remember because there's only one. And these are known as the bryophytes. This is the actual, I believe it's actually the scientific name for the non-vascular plants. And there are only 3 examples that we talk about. The mosses, which is what you see here, the liverworts, which is what you see here, and the hornworts, okay? Not hogwarts, okay, that's Harry Potter. This is science. Hornworts, okay? Named obviously because they look like they have tiny little horns sprouting up, okay? The liverworts are known because of their kind of like a lobed outer structure there, okay? Almost looks like little earlobes sort of all over the place. That's the liverworts. And then moss, hopefully you've seen growing in the forest or something before, but this is oftentimes called like nature's carpet. When I was younger, I was at my friend's house and we were playing in the backyard, my sister and I, and they had a lake. And down by the lake, we would each build our own forts. And I specifically remember like ripping up moss from the banks of the lake and taking it to our little fort and using it as carpet because it was like soft green carpet. But anyways, that's moss. So in total, the plant kingdom is divided into vascular and non-vascular, okay? Focusing just on the vascular for a second, the 2 groups are seeds and seedless. Then within the seed-bearing groups, you have the angiosperms and gymnosperms. Differences are that angiosperms produce seeds inside of flowers, while the gymnosperms produce seeds inside of a cone. The angiosperms then split into monocot and dicot. The monocot has 1 cotyledon, and the dicot has 2 cotyledons or baby seed leaves. And then the only group of gymnosperms is the conifers, okay? Or it is the conifers. The only group of gymnosperms is just the different examples of them. So conifers, cycads, ginkgo, and notophytes. Going over to the seedless vascular plants, okay, so now we're here. There's no really further subgroupings from that we go over, just the different examples: ferns, whisk ferns, horsetails, and club mosses. Now, just because they're seedless does not mean they can't reproduce. It just means they don't actually form seeds. They'll reproduce by spores, or they'll reproduce asexually by like some sort of cloning or kind of twinning themselves, so to speak, which we'll get to later. And then the other grouping, like I said, is a lot smaller. There's a good reason why I made this side, or why this side was made so much bigger than the other side, because 94% of plants fall into this category, of the vascular category. Only a very small percentage belong in the non-vascular. So the only group of non-vascular plants that we have is the bryophytes, and then the 3 examples of those are the mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. Now, do not panic, because tomorrow your set of notes will look similar to what you see on this screen right here. And just like we had a classification chart for animals back in October, we'll have a similar one for the plant kingdom. So if you can print off the notes, that's great. If not, I will show you how to do it by hand. So don't panic, but we're going to go through this plant chart quite a few times, and it is pretty interesting to see how it all fits together. So make sure you have your notes all together, and we'll move on to the chart tomorrow.